Well, happy Mother's Day to the mothers that are here today. A lot of times preachers nowadays have taken the approach that they don't want to really single people out, and they don't want to really say Happy Mother's Day because there may be people who struggle with that day and all. But you know what? I think we can honor people without dishonoring other people. So happy Mother's Day to our mothers that are here. To those who one day will become mothers, happy Mother's Day. We just want to say that. As I thought about what to preach on this morning, I thought about, let's talk about a role model for women. And as I thought about women role models in the Bible, there was a name that came up. A name that is not just a role model for women, but a role model for, everybody. And it's also a much-loved story in the Bible, and that's the story of Hadassah. Hadassah had another name you're probably more familiar with. It's Esther, a Jewish girl who grew up to become queen of Persia, who at great risk to her own self, her own life, she saved her people. I like to think of her as a paragon of beauty and virtue. That word paragon, you may not be very familiar with it. Paragon simply means a picture of perfection. She is the perfect picture of beauty and virtue. I like being lovely and beautiful, and her faith and her courage. If you would open up your Bibles to the book of Esther. Now, I know some of you are thinking, wait a second. On Wednesday night, in our study of 2 Peter, we got through about 4 verses, and that was in 30 minutes. And now we're going to get through 10 chapters in about 30 minutes? Are you kidding me? No, I'm not kidding you. That's what we're going to do. In fact, that's only the first part of the lesson, as a matter of fact. But anyway, Esther provides lessons for younger women, but also for older women. And for men of all ages, they can also look at the story of Esther and learn lessons. To see how, let's first review the story of Esther. And Esther's story begins with the expulsion of Vashti. King Ahasuerus ruled Persia 486 to 465 BC. And he was also known as Xerxes. Xerxes is easier for me to say. So that's what we're going to go with, all right? We're going to call him Xerxes, okay? But anyway, King Xerxes has a 6-month celebration. 6 months he celebrates. And how do you end a 6-month celebration? You end a 6-month celebration with a week-long celebration. A week-long feast that he hosted for all of his nobles and for all of the men of his kingdom. His wife, Queen Vashti, also hosted a feast for the women. Now, during this feast, at least on Xerxes' side of things, the purpose of it, Esther chapter 1, verses 4 through 8, tells us that it was to basically show off how wealthy he was. To show off all of his wonderful things, all of the great things that his kingdom had. And actually, as we move on down, we get to verses 7 and 8. And it tells us a little bit about what this feast was really about. Drinks were served in golden vessels of different kinds. And the royal wine was lavished according to the bounty of the king. And drinking was according to this edict. There is no compulsion, for the king had given orders to all the staff of his palace to do as each man desired. So in other words, he was showing off how wealthy he was, and part of what he was showing off in his wealth was that he could give everybody as much to drink as they possibly could want. It didn't matter if they were so slobbering drunk they couldn't stand up. If they wanted another drink, they got another drink. That's the way it was for Xerxes in this feast. Well, Xerxes is showing off all of his beautiful, all of his wonderful treasures. And then he has this idea. I got this other treasure. My wife, Vashti. I'm going to show her off too. Because I want all these guys to know just how fortunate I am to have such a beautiful, beautiful wife. And so in verses 10 through 12 of chapter 1, we read, on the seventh day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine. He was drunk, okay? In English. When the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded the seven eunuchs who served in the presence of King Xerxes to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown in order to show the peoples and the princes her beauty, for she was lovely to look at. That doesn't sound so bad, does it? I mean, he's been involved in this feast for 7 days, and he wants to show off how beautiful his wife is. There's nothing wrong with the husband feeling like his wife is so beautiful that he wants to show off her beauty, except for the fact that Xerxes was drunk. And except for the fact that he really wasn't showing off her as much as he was showing off for himself. Vashti knows this. And so in verse 12 we read, but Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command delivered by the eunuchs. At this the king became enraged, and his anger burned within him. She refuses to cooperate. And so Xerxes gets a little bit upset. Actually, he gets a lot upset. He gets a lot upset and very irrational, as a matter of fact. Because in his anger, Xerxes banishes Vashti. She is never to come into his presence again, as a warning to all wives. That's what his advisors, who had been at this feast and probably were about in the same condition he was, that's what they suggest to him. If you look at Esther chapter 1, verses 19 through 22, it says, if it pleases the king, let a royal order go out from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it may not be repealed, that Vashti is never again to come before King Xerxes. And let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. So when the decree made by the king is proclaimed throughout all his kingdom, for it is vast, all women will give honor to their husbands, high and low alike. And this pleased Xerxes, and so that's exactly what he did in his anger. But you know, the expulsion of Vashti is actually what leads to the exaltation of Esther, the elevation of Esther, in chapter 2 of the book of Esther. The search for Vashti's replacement was begun. Xerxes' anger subsides. You might say his stupidity is revealed. And he realizes he doesn't have a queen. Needs to have a queen. So he does what any king would do if he was looking for a wife. He has a beauty contest of sorts. Has women from all over his kingdom come in. Because see, it wasn't so simple. He couldn't just say, well, I blew it with Vashti. I'm sorry. I'll apologize to her and bring her back. No, this was written in accordance with the laws of the Medes and the Persians, which could not be changed. So he has to find somebody else. So a kingdom-wide search is made. Now let me tell you a little bit about Esther. In Susa, which was a province of the kingdom, there was a Mordecai. Mordecai was a Jew who was raising his lovely and beautiful cousin Hadassah, or Esther. Mordecai had been carried into exile by Nebuchadnezzar of the Babylonians. So if you're trying to piece this together with the other parts of the Old Testament, this is after Babylon falls and the Medes and the Persians take over. That's when the story of Esther takes place. So Esther was orphaned, though, and so Mordecai is helping to raise her, being a dutiful family member. And Esther, chapter 2, verse 7 says, had a beautiful figure and was lovely to look at. And so because she had a beautiful figure and was lovely to look at, she was taken along with others to the palace and underwent 12 months of preparation for this beauty contest. This contest to see who would be the next queen. And ultimately she won that contest. She was selected to replace Vashti. But she did not reveal that she was a Jew. You look at chapter 2, verse 20. It tells us a little bit about why she did not. Chapter 2, verse 20 says, Esther had not made known her kindred or her people as Mordecai had commanded her, for Esther obeyed Mordecai just as when she was brought up by him. So even though she is an adult now, she still listens to Mordecai's advice. There's a lesson for our young people. Even though you're getting older and you can think for yourself, when your mom or your dad tells you to do something, you probably should still do it. Or at least give it some consideration and take it into advisement. But anyway, so she didn't reveal that she was a Jew because she was in exile. And she didn't reveal that she was a Jew not only because Mordecai told her she shouldn't, but because if she had, well, let's just say it could have been held against her in many different ways. Many different ways. So she is selected as queen and she's ruling. And meanwhile, we're told about Mordecai revealing a plot by two of the guards to assassinate King Xerxes. He does this. The guards are found out. The appropriate punishment is handed out. They are hanged. And this was recorded in the book of Chronicles in the presence of the king. We'll see the importance of that a little bit later on in the story. So we've got the expulsion of Vashti and the elevation of Esther. Next in the story, in chapters 3 and 4, we read about the extermination of the Jews planned. Enter Haman, the Agagite. Haman is promoted, and as part of the promotion, Xerxes gives the order, the edict, that people who see him on the street are to bow to him, are to pay him that honor. And so as he walks down, everybody's bowing down to him, and he feels pretty good about that, except for this one guy named Mordecai. He wouldn't bow down. He wouldn't show Haman any respect or any honor. And so Haman, no bowing, no honor. Haman began to hate Mordecai. Not just hate him a little bit, hate him a lot. Hate him terribly. This was not a minor thing to Haman. So Haman goes to Xerxes and he receives permission from Xerxes to kill Mordecai. But not just Mordecai, but all of the Jews. I mean, that was his plan on the 13th of Adar. If you look at Esther chapter 3, verse 6, we find out why. It says, but Haman disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, so as they had made known to him the people of Mordecai, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. Have you ever been that mad at somebody that you not only wanted to eliminate them, but you wanted to eliminate their family, anyone that was associated with them, their entire race of people? Yet that's how angry Haman was at Mordecai. And so Mordecai mourns in sackcloth and ashes at the king's gate. Because since he was dressed in sackcloth, he couldn't go into the palace grounds. And Esther is told that Mordecai is at the king's gate and that he's dressed in sackcloth. So she sends to find out. Mordecai sends a copy of the edict to Esther. And Mordecai convinces Esther that it's up to her. She has to approach the king. She has to do something so that this tragedy can be averted. Even though it would be a great risk to her own life. I mean, going into the presence of the king, that wasn't just like you were doing that and they would slap you on the wrist. If you weren't summoned to the presence of the king and you went into the presence of the king, you would not be living much longer. Unless the king decided, no, you're okay. And so that's what happens. Esther goes in, and it's been 30 days since she had been summoned. So it's a tremendous risk. But in Esther chapter 4, verses 12 through 14, it says, and they told Mordecai what Esther had said. And Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise from the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. That's probably the theme of the book of Esther. Those are the main verses. For such a time as this. Mordecai tells Esther, who knows, but you're not the queen, so that you can defeat this plot by Haman. And so she goes into the king. And that's where we read in chapter 5 through chapter 9 about the extermination of the Jews defeated. Esther goes into the king and she is granted an audience with the king. She first thing she does, though, she calls all of the Jews in Susa to fast with her for 3 days. And then she goes to the king, and the king extends his golden scepter. That's very important, because that was the sign that it was okay for her to come and approach him. And so she approaches, she touches the tip of his scepter. He says, what do you want? My queen, up to half the kingdom and it's yours. All you got to do is ask. And she says, well, I don't want half the kingdom, no, but what I'd like for you to do is come to a banquet and bring Haman with you tonight. The king says, well, okay. While she is at this banquet, she asks them to come to another banquet. She asked them to come to another banquet the next night. And Xerxes, I mean, you got to give him some credit. He probably knows something's up here. But so he says, okay, well, we'll do it then. We'll come tomorrow night. And that night, though, well, some say that Esther didn't accuse Haman at that first banquet because she lost her nerve. Others, though, say that it wasn't because she lost her nerve. It was because it was her plan, sort of to put Haman at ease so she could catch him off guard, and so he wouldn't have anything to defend himself with. But for whatever reason, she doesn't bring it up that first time, but she does invite them to a second banquet. That night, Haman leaves, and he is glad and joyful of heart until he sees Mordecai. When he sees Mordecai, and Mordecai doesn't appreciate him, doesn't honor him, he gets really mad. He goes home, he tells his wife and his friends, and they have this great idea. Say, why don't you build a gallows, not just a regular gallows, a gallows 75 feet high. And then go in the morning to Xerxes and ask him if you can hang Mordecai on it, and then do it, and then go to the banquet the next night and enjoy yourself. And Haman thinks, that's a pretty good idea. And so he builds the gallows. That night the king can't sleep. He has a little bit of insomnia, you might say. And so he orders that the book of the Chronicles of the king be read to him. And he uncovers that Mordecai had uncovered a plot against him, yet nothing had been done to honor Mordecai, the Jew. So there's a lesson in there for you. If you ever can't sleep, go back and read 1st and 2nd Chronicles, and it'll cure your insomnia. It will. I mean, that wasn't exactly what Xerxes was reading here. It was his own chronicles, but, there's some pretty dry reading there. But anyway, so he can't sleep. This really bugged Xerxes. And it was still bugging him the next morning. And he's sitting on his throne and he says, okay, guys, who's out? Who of my nobles is out in the courtyard? And they said, well, look, Haman's coming. He's, oh, good, he's a great guy. He knows just what to do. So he summons Haman. Haman's really excited. He's going in there. He's going to present his plot, his plan to Xerxes to have Mordecai killed that morning so that he can enjoy the banquet that night. And the king stops him before he can get out of word. He said, I need to know something from you. What should be done to the man that the king really wants to honor? And Haman thinks to himself, well, who would he rather honor but me? And so he says, well, this is what you need to do. You need to get the best horse, the best robes, things that the king has rode and worn, and have one of the king's highest nobles go before this man and say, this is what is done for the man the king likes to honor. And Xerxes says, that's it. That's perfect. We need to do that for Mordecai the Jew. And Haman, you need to be the one that goes with them and does the shouting. This is what is done for the man the king likes to honor. Haman wisely doesn't decide to ask about hanging Mordecai at that time. So anyway, he goes home though, but Haman is disgraced by it. And he goes home and he tells his wife what happened. And verse 13 of chapter 6, the last part, his wife says, if Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of the Jewish people, you will not overcome him, but will surely fall before him. That night, he goes to the dinner, the banquet for the king and Haman. And in chapter 7, we read about that banquet and how in the first 6 verses, Xerxes says again, okay, Esther, what is it that you want? Really, don't tell me come back to another banquet. What is it that you want? And that's when she says, my plea and my wish is for my people, my life and the lives of my people. And then he says, wait a second, who's threatening my queen? And she says, Haman. And the king gets a little bit upset. I mean, we've seen his anger before back in chapter 1, didn't we? I mean, and what he would do. So at least now he goes out into the garden, okay? And he maybe is trying to cool off. But you know what happens when he comes back into the room where they were? He comes in just in time to see Haman falling on the same couch that Esther was on. Okay, so he wasn't mad enough before. He cooled off a little bit. And now he sees Haman on the same couch as his wife. And immediately they cover Haman's face. You want to know why? He's going to die. Plain and simple. And somebody says, hey, by the way, there's a gallows 75 feet high next door to Haman's house. He built it to hang Mordecai. You know, the guy that saved your life, king? He built it to hang Mordecai on it. And Xerxes says, well, let's just hang him on it. And so they do, and Esther is given Haman's house. Mordecai is promoted. The plan to save the Jews is put into play. They're allowed to defend themselves. The Jews are spared. Their enemies are destroyed. Esther and Mordecai institute the Feast of Purim to commemorate the Jews' deliverance. You can read all about that in Esther chapter 9. Then we have the exaltation of Mordecai. Mordecai becomes second to King Xerxes of Persia. He also becomes great and well received among the Jews, looks out for them, seeks their good, seeking their peace. It's truly an exciting story, the story of Esther is. Well, let's now quickly review Esther's beauty and virtue. She was a woman of great beauty. Esther 2:7 says she was lovely and beautiful. Taken with many other women, Xerxes chooses her above all. She pleased the eunuch that was taking charge of the women, obtained favor in all the sight of everyone that she had contact with. They all loved her. And Xerxes as well loved her more than all the other women, and so she's chosen. She was also a woman of great virtue as well. She was pure up until the time when she went to the king. She honored Mordecai as her surrogate father, just like the commandments told her to, like the law told her to. She also remained in contact with him. I mean, a lot of times when we get a little bit up there and all in our career, maybe we kind of don't like to worry ourselves with our mom or our dad anymore. Well, not Esther. She continued to listen to Mordecai. She continued to be in contact with him. But she also displayed faith in God's providence. She, according to accepting Mordecai's view that her position might be providential. So she goes to the king, risks her life, her position. Remember Xerxes' temper. She could have lost more than just her position. She could have lost her life. She called upon others to fast with her, though, before. And she went to the king, and all was well. Esther proved that she was more than just a pretty face, more than just somebody who was lovely to look at. She proved herself to be what Peter would call in 1 Peter 3:6, a true daughter of Sarah. Beautiful on the outside, as was Sarah, but also beautiful on the inside, as all women of God should be, and as all men of God should be for that matter. May this paragon of beauty and virtue serve as a role model for women and daughters, but also for men and sons as well, everywhere. You know, the story of Esther is a wonderful story. It's a wonderful story of someone who risked their life to save their people. There's another story in the Bible, though, in the New Testament, about a man who gave up heaven to come and live on earth. Not so that he could be treated like the king that he was, but so that he could be killed and 3 days later rise again. Of course, that was Jesus. That's how much Jesus loves you. Do you love Jesus? If you do, that's wonderful. If you do, you need to show it. How do you show it? Well, you show it initially by being immersed in the watery grave of baptism, allowing the blood of Jesus to wash your sins away. If you haven't done that, you know, there's not a better present you could give your mom today than for you to become a Christian today. Maybe you've made that commitment, but since that time you've sort of not been following what you need to do to show yourself a faithful servant. Maybe what you need to do is privately respond and ask God to help you to be a better servant of His. Maybe what you need to do is publicly respond, asking the church body here to pray with you and to pray for you. Wherever that response is, don't leave here this morning not having things right between you and God. And if we can help you in some way through a public response to do that, won't you come to the front as we stand and sing together?